This was my old table saw. It's a 1970s 10-inch contractor saw. It combined the benefits of a cast iron cabinet saw with the ease and relative portability of a contractor saw. My grandfather bought it before I was born and I've been using it for about a year, and it had a ton of issues. Could this budget Ryobi job site saw be the answer? Let's find out. Let's talk about what was wrong with the Craftsman. First of all, there was zero dust collection. It didn't really exist when this saw was built. No riving knife, it was impossible to keep the fence square. It slid about as well as a piano sliding down a staircase. The throat plate was held in with Allen key grub screws and there was nowhere to put an aftermarket riving knife. Did I mention it was a to turn the adjustment wheels? I looked at some ways to improve the saw, it being a family heirloom and all. I could have put a new fence on it, boxed in the bottom, added a dust port. All these improvements would have cost a lot of time, money, and a new fence system would have taken up twice the space in my already tiny packed shop. But if you want to see a great video of somebody making these exact improvements, go check out Robert Dunn's video. I'll link it in the description. If you're mad at me for getting rid of the Craftsman, and you'd like to tell me how the old tool was far superior to this Ryobi, please do let me have it in the comments. I might even agree with you. In the meantime, let's have a look at the Ryobi. This is what I replaced the Craftsman with. The Ryobi RTS23 10-inch table saw with expanded capacity and a rolling stand. I recycled the rolling stand because I already have a rolling base cabinet to mount it on. Yeah, I know. Ryobi isn't exactly known for precision high-end tools. But if you watch channels like Home with Stefani, who remodels a couple of houses, or Drew Build Stuff, who recently built a tiny house by himself, you will see that the age-old adage that a tool is only as effective as the person using it rings true. Both Stefani and Drew use many Ryobi tools and build things most of us could only dream of. I know, buy once, cry once. I love this saying, but when it comes to woodworking, we could all easily spend $25,000 building a great shop and still need more. It's a bottomless pit. I found this saw for sale on Direct Factory Tools, which is the outlet site for TTI, the company that makes Ryobi, Rigid, and Milwaukee tools. I got it on a Memorial Day sale where it was selling for $140. This is not the norm, of course, and it came at the expense of losing 2 out of the 3 years off the warranty. However, I figured if there was something wrong with the saw, I'd probably know about it long before a year got here. At this price, the value for money is fantastic, but I would still be happy to pay the $250 I regularly see the saw for. I went with Ryobi because they've been making some really good budget-friendly tools lately. With pressure from other budget brands, I think they have stepped it up in both the tools they make and the customer service that's behind them. Setting up the saw is a breeze. The instruction manual has lots of pictures, which is perfect for millennials with 5-second attention spans. And the saw comes put together pretty much right out of the box. I followed the instructions and used Keith Brown's video on how to set up a table saw as a general guide. I'll link that video below. First, I checked that the table itself was flat. Next, I checked that the fence was square to the table and that the fence was parallel to the blade. This is adjusted by the 2 bolts on the top of the fence. A good way to check if the fence is set up correctly is to slide it up to the blade and then spin the blade, making sure there's an even gap between the fence and the blade. Make sure you unplug the saw before doing any of this. Finally, I checked that the miter slot was square to the blade. Keith explains how to test for this in his video in detail, and mine was perfect out of the box, so I didn't want to mess with it. If you do need to make adjustments to make your blade parallel to the miter slot, there are 2 bolts underneath the table above the adjustment wheel that you can use to calibrate it. The adjustment wheel on this saw is very smooth and easy to operate, a big change from the Craftsman. To operate the tilt feature, you simply unlock the small gray lever above the adjustment wheel and slide it into position. To adjust the 0 degree and 45 degree stops perfectly, use the Allen key grub screws on the tabletop. The fence rail tape measure was not super accurate out of the box, but the pointer on the fence is adjustable, so it allows you to dial it in. Because this saw has an extension wing, it comes with another pointer that moves with the wing as it extends. Setting this allows you to use the lower measuring tape to set the fence when the table is extended. Overall, this saw is a joy to use. The dust collection alone was a reason to upgrade, and while it isn't perfect, I would estimate it collects about 85 to 90% of the dust the saw produces, whereas before I couldn't collect any. The fence, while not super robust, is very easy to put on and take off and is made from lightweight aluminum. It also seems to remain square, even being handled and taken on and off the saw. It also stores nicely in 2 hangers underneath the table. This saw has a riving knife, which is removable without a tool and moves up and down with the blade. For my little bit of research, these fancy riving knives have only recently been incorporated into cheaper saws. It's a really nice thing to have and makes using the saw much safer. It can be set at a high or a low height, depending on whether or not you're making a through cut. The throat plate is easy to remove and requires no tools. It has adjustment screws to help you set it flush with the aluminum table. This saw will also take up to a 1/2 inch dado stack, something a lot of job site saws can't do. The motor isn't a tank, but it's plenty powerful. I've cut through 8/4 walnut with this saw, and it takes some time, but it can do it. Again, a huge improvement over my old saw. You can get this saw without the extending wing. However, as a woodworker, you will want all the capacity you can get. I think the only people who would want the saw without the wing would be contractors who only plan to make rip cuts. Now, we all knew the saw wasn't going to be perfect, and it's not. To start with, it's extremely loud. Somehow not as loud as the saw it's replacing, but considering it's 50 years younger, it's still pretty bad. The dust collection, while it does exist and collects most of the dust, is far from perfect. You still need a respirator when working with this tool. It's a huge step up over the Craftsman. The saw feels cheap, but not flimsy. You can tell that it was built to a price, which you shouldn't be surprised by. The miter gauge, as expected, is a joke. You could set it up to be a perfect 90-degree crosscut and leave it there, but it fits so poorly in the miter slot that it still wouldn't be super accurate. Speaking of the miter slot, there's only one. And the one that's there has these weird little tabs on it. I assume this is to keep the miter gauge from falling off the saw, but for anyone using it for woodworking and not construction, you're going to want to cut those little tabs off with a grinder to allow a sled or a normal miter gauge to operate with this machine. Or you could buy these runners from Etsy that are made to work with these slots. Your call. So, was replacing my old Craftsman with this new Ryobi the right choice? Yes. This tool is much easier to use. It's much lighter. It has a fence that stays square. There's dust collection. It's awesome. I love old tools, and if I had the time to fix it up and the space to use it, I would have kept the old Craftsman. It's now in the garage of another woodworker who has the space and the time to fix it up. But I'm very happy with the Ryobi, and my first project using it is going to be a black walnut dog bowl stand. If you'd like to see that video, consider subscribing and hit the bell notification. It'll notify you when I post it. I'm not a big time YouTuber. I can't test a bunch of different saws, so if you have an opinion on one that might be a little bit better than this, by all means leave it in the comments. And if you have any more questions about it, anything I didn't answer, leave it down there as well, and I or maybe somebody else can answer it for you. Thanks for watching.